board, bang, and let me go to here. Okay, so looking at our Canvas site, and where are we? We are now module 4 today. Okay, there's your reading assignment for today, Michael Pollan, and your reading responses from the Botany of Desire. They are here. I was generally pleased with the responses from everybody's reading responses in class. They've been good. No general comments there. And here are your paper topics, okay? I went over these last week. Whoops. So I don't really feel the need to go over them again. Although I do have 1 point, please. And I didn't really go over this with you all. If you would, I think it's probably easiest if you all would write these papers in Google Docs. How's that sound? Is that doable for you guys? I'm just thinking because I've never done this before, but I have to do all my grading digitally. I'm usually a red pen grader for papers, but I'm gonna have to do this digitally. So I think I'm gonna need you all to give me in Google Docs. Google Docs, I think, is probably the easiest way for me to do these kinds of edits. Okay. So next week is October 1st. That's when we meet again, and that's when your papers are due. In case I didn't make this clear last week, they're due anytime that day. Okay. Just by the end of the day on the 1st. I'm going to be looking them over. I'll read them over. I'll put together my comments and get them back to you as soon as I can. And then the final drafts will be due 2 weeks after that. Okay. As I indicated earlier, please give a draft. The more you give me, the more help this process can be, and the better the final product will be. Okay. There will be deductions for each day that drafts are late, so please keep these timely and plan accordingly. I talked about the formatting. I just want standard formatting, nothing too funky, please. I'm going to talk about the thesis statement today. Quoting is fine. I think it's important for you to quote. But don't go overboard, right? I still need to hear your voice in the paper. For these papers, each of the topics, you'll pick one of the topics below, but each of the topics, each of the topics is only about a single text in the class. You may choose to write about that Tao Te Ching, you may choose to write about Michael Pollan, or you may choose to write about Rousseau. That's not to say you can't bring in other sources if you want, but you're not required to. I'm going to keep citations really, really simple for these papers. Simply put, the page number in parentheses at the end of the quote. And then at the end, you'll have a little bibliography or works cited page and just indicate the texts. And I've given you the format here of how that should look: author, last name, first name, book title, translator, city of publisher, publisher name, year. Okay. And I went over these, I think I went over these topics last week, so I'm not going to go over them again. Does anybody have any questions at this point about the papers? Any general questions? Okay. Well, I'm going to stick around after class a little bit in case anybody wants to chat. And as I've told you all, I'm available to talk at any time. Just email me and set up an appointment to talk. You may send me an outline at any time. That's fine if you want me to sign off on it. And then of course you'll give me the draft next week and I will comment on it, give it back to you. And if you want to set up another appointment at that point to talk about my edits, I'd be happy to chat again. Okay? All right. Any questions? Okay. So I'm going to, I'm going to go over, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about building a thesis statement, okay, or how you will operate, how you will designate, sorry, how you will designate a thesis statement. Sorry, I'm sharing again. And I put this on Canvas here. We have a thesis statement worksheet that I wanted to go over with you all here. So about a thesis statement, well, let me back up for a second and just see if anybody can tell me, well, what is a thesis statement? How would you define it?
It's a claim of your paper.
It's a claim of your paper. Anybody else?
It's the general idea of your paper, your argument, like your thought, and then backing it up with your knowledge.
Good. Love it. Where should it appear? Where should the reader find the thesis statement?
The intro.
The intro.
You should find it at the end of your intro. So basically at the end of the first paragraph. So it sets the basis of everything.
Ideally. That's perfect, Kendall. Seems like a minor fact, but yeah, that's when it should come. Any thoughts on why it should be the end of your first paragraph? Why not the first sentence?
You have to build up to it.
I'm sorry?
You have to build up to it. You know, have to capture the reader's attention.
Good. Any other thoughts?
It leads better into the rest of the writing if you have it right before the rest of what you're saying to like support it.
Good. Felix says you need to give background first on what your thesis will be. Excellent. Anybody else? Yeah, you need to set it up. You need to introduce it. Maybe ideally explain why, your thesis, you're making an argument that pertains to an issue or a problem. You might explain why the problem occurs in the first place, But in general, yeah, you need to give a little bit of an introduction. Just a few sentences. Setting up that thesis. Then you lay the thesis down, the claim, and then you move into the body of the paper, and those, as Anne pointed out, those, the paper then supports the thesis. Okay. Now I'm going to share our screen and take a look at this thesis. So a couple pointers about this thesis statement. It should not contain two conflicting ideas. If the ideas are in conflict, it is impossible to support them both. These are all just some general pointers here. A thesis statement should never be so broad that it's difficult to discuss all the relevant information, okay? If it's too broad, then the supporting evidence in the paper will not support it, okay? A thesis statement is an assertion that requires evidence support, not a universally agreed upon fact or observation. Be prepared to offer the evidence to support for the thesis. Let them match up to each other. Here's an example of universally agreed upon fact or observation. People use many lawn chemicals. Okay, great, so what? Here's a proper thesis. People are poisoning the environment with chemicals merely to keep their lawns green. So you can see the difference here is this is putting it into an argument already, right? It's going to explain that the chemicals are the poisoning agent, or the poisoning is happening on, the chemicals are behind it, and the purpose is to keep lawns green. Next, a thesis takes a stand rather than announcing a subject. Here's an example. The thesis of this paper is the difficulty of solving our environmental problems. That doesn't take a stand. Here's a better thesis. Solving our environmental problems is more difficult than many environmentalists believe. A thesis is the main idea, not the title. This is related to the conversation we were just having, right? You build into the thesis, you don't announce it from the get-go. It must be a complete sentence, yes please, that expresses in some detail what claim you plan to support. Title, Security in Old Age. Thesis, continuing changes in the Social Security system make it almost impossible to plan intelligently for retirement. Again, you're making a claim, you're making an argument that you're then going to go back up with evidence. A thesis statement is narrow rather than broad. This is a big problem I see in student papers. If the thesis statement is sufficiently narrow, it can be supported. That's what we want, right? Broad, the American steel industry has many problems. Narrow, the primary problem of the American steel industry is the lack of funds to renovate outdated plans and equipment. Notice specifics that then indicate what will be discussed in the paper that's coming. A thesis statement is specific rather than vague or general. Vague, Hemingway's war stories are good. Yep, that's pretty weak. Specific, Hemingway's stories helped create a new prose style by employing extensive dialogue, shorter sentences, and strong Anglo-Saxon words. You might highlight this here. This is a good example. This indicates already, you know, what the following paragraphs will be, right? You're going to support, you know, this thesis indicates that the author is going to support the claim by looking at extensive dialogue, shorter sentences, and strong Anglo-Saxon words, right? You're going to get paragraphs on all three. A thesis statement has one point, main point, rather than several main points. More than one point may be too difficult for the reader to understand and the writer to support. Yeah, I'm not going to go over that one. That's fine. But I want to take a look at this here. We're going to go over these briefly, and then I'm going to turn it over to you guys to see if you can transform these. But the first object here is to identify the problems in these thesis statements. So the first one, these are all problematic. What's the problem? The World's Fair in New Orleans was a disaster because of the way the press criticized the way it was run. But it was exciting for little children and had many good food booths. What's the problem?
It's conflicting ideas.
Conflicting ideas, cool. Anybody else? Yes. I was also going to say maybe you have a variety of other points in there. I see Alina says also contradictory, but yeah, being contradictory is the main issue, right? What are you going to look at here? Number two, like you look at the criticism of the press, or are you going to look at the way it was exciting? Number two, TV commercials are obnoxious to the person who's intent on watching a good show. On the other hand, they provide entertainment in the antics of the performers, and they provide a good opportunity to take a snack break. What's the problem with this one?
There are too many points being made, and they both go against each other. I mean, you're saying one thing, but then you're following up by saying, on the other hand, like you should only be making one point and not multiple in this statement.
Good. Yes, I see that in the chat. Felix says brings up argument against thesis. I wonder if you explain yourself, Felix. I'm not exactly sure what you mean there. And I'm asking because I think yes, again, we have an issue that there's too many things going on here. It doesn't seem streamlined or straightforward enough. Are these contradictory in this case? Yes, it looks like it's contradictory again. But I think there may also be another problem here. Anybody else have an idea? What's wrong with this one?
I was gonna say it's unneeded information.
What do you mean?
Just like the end part of like they provide entertainment in the antics of the performers, and they provide a good opportunity to take a snack break. Like I feel like that last segment could just be thrown away.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Alina says, not really an argument. Yep. And Felix says, in the thesis paper, you should bring up the counter argument at some point to break it down and assert your thesis. But if your thesis is already included, both arguments, it's hard to do that. Yeah. You're kind of, jumping the gun for sure. But I would say in general, what I don't like about this one is it doesn't really indicate what stand. Are you taking a stand or not? You know, that's pretty weak. Look at number 3. Since politicians are constantly bombarding each other, how do they expect anyone to know who is right and who is wrong? What do y'all think? Elva Dong says, not a statement. What do you mean, Elva? No, not a statement. What does that mean? Anonymous is non-specific. Yeah.
You're not really backing their claim.
What does that mean?
Like how they're saying, since politicians are constantly bombarding each other, they're not really giving examples of that.
Gotcha. And Elva explained herself, and this is exactly what I was looking for. A thesis statement needs to make a claim. It's not making a claim. This is an observation, and then like frustration, useless. What do I do with that? Good. 4, unless people are conscious of pollution, the world would be destroyed by the year 2050. Oh God, I'm already getting scared reading a paper like that. What's wrong with this, everybody? Or anyone? Anybody know? This is a fact, way too broad, yes. This is way too broad. 5, rap is both a creative and an original form of music. It also has its roots in American jazz. What do you think about this one? Ava doesn't argue anything. Alina, not really an argument, just a general statement. Good. And as Felix points out correctly, this should be one statement, not 2. Unnecessary context. Interesting. Elva, what do you mean by that? Unnecessary. Maybe are you reading that in that sentence? It suggests that American jazz is the tangent. It's like a tangential statement. Perhaps. Okay. Here's what I want to do. Right, here we go. Elvis says it has a fact, which isn't related to the argument of rap being creative and original. Yep, very good. Excellent. I mean, you could argue that, you know, well, I won't say that because that'll give away the next statement, but I want you to take 5 minutes now and scribble down corrections. What should these theses look like? Fix them. How could you turn above sentences into an acceptable thesis statement? Take 5 minutes and do that, and we'll revisit.
Professor, did you want us to redo all
Oh,
of
I'm
that?
so sorry. Alina says, scroll up. Sorry. Here we go. Boom. There you go. This is also on your own Canvas site too, if that helps. Sorry, I'm having difficulty operating the chat. Yeah, I was supplying it. And in some of these, there's no single answer, right? Just do your best to fashion what you think would be an acceptable thesis statement. Put your thumbs up when you're done. Anybody done? Mm. Another 2 minutes about. Is that a thumbs up, Duncan? Nice. You can also use the thumbs up icon on your canvas. All right, one more minute. Finish these up. Okay, I wonder if someone would please, why don't you type in the chat, give me your version of number 1. Better version, that is. That can be any of you. Any or all, whatever you want. Oh, whoops. My chat is hidden again. God damn it. Sorry, everybody. Okay. Thank you, Mackenzie. The World's Fair in New Orleans was a disaster, but because of the way it was, well, there's one grammatical issue, but because of the way it was run. Not ran. Good. Anybody else? No? No competing ones? The World's Fair in New Orleans was a disaster due to its poor direction. Like it. Yeah, I think that was pretty straightforward. Good. How about number 2? Go ahead. Anybody? Any and all. Oh, shoot. Max, I see you asked a question earlier. Sorry. Oh, boy. Is anybody putting up their answer for number 2? Elva. TV commercials are necessary because they provide a built-in snack break, generate revenue, and create suspense in the show. I don't agree with this. That's good. I like it. I like it because Elva has given herself a little bit of made it easy for herself from here. By the way, any other versions of number 2, feel free to put them on right now. But I like what Elva did because now I know that there's going to be a paragraph coming about the built-in snack break, how they generate revenue, and they create suspense in the show. She indicated clearly. Duncan, TV commercials are absolutely essential because they not only provide entertainment, they provide a good opportunity for a snack break. Perfect. Rachel, TV commercials are hated by everyone, but there's no denying they provide entertainment in the antics performance as well as a good opportunity to take a snack break. That is nice as well. Although I have to admit, being hated by everyone, that might be a little distracting, but you are pretty clear about what's coming. So I think that definitely helps a lot. How about number 3? Let's get some examples of number 3 up there. Is anybody putting number 3 up? There we go, Alina. Due to the constantly turbulent political atmosphere, the line between fact and opinion has become dangerously blurred. Yeah, that definitely sounds better. Good, I like it. I like it. Yep. Rachel, politicians are stupid because they expect they're always right while another person has the same mentality. Okay. Duncan, constant bombardment between politicians blurs our sense of right and wrong. Yeah, I like what Duncan does there because it indicates what the key problem is that our sense of right and wrong have been blurred. And it does indicate at least a good segment of the evidence that's coming in the supporting paragraphs, which is he's going to talk about the constant bombardment between politicians. Super. How about number 4? Oh, we got another one. Today's politicians from Ava. Today's politicians' constant personal attacks on each other only further contributes to the plague of misinformation that we're currently facing in America. Oh, Ava, I love it. That sounds like an article I just read on MSNBC. Excellent. Great. Number 4. The bad version. Unless people are conscious of pollution, the world will be destroyed by the year 2050. Let's see what you got. Oh, Rachel, no. I said there was going to be no single answer. Don't worry about that. And, actually, Rachel's comment raises something here. Don't feel you need to necessarily use the most florid language. I can't tell you how many times the best thesis I've seen is straight and simple and to the point, that is absolutely valid as well, Purple prose bad. Is that what that means, Elva? Okay. Let's see. Thank you. Let's see what Naima says. American capitalism has expedited global warming because of its reliance on fossil fuels, plastic waste, and non-ethical means of production. Love it. And while I have you all here, I want you all to pay attention to this very common problem everybody makes. It's is a contraction. It is. Mr. Naima should have had it's without. Your English language is cray-cray, okay? It makes no sense. That's just the way it is. I apologize on behalf of the English language, but I have bad news. That's just the way it is. So be careful. That's a very common mistake that people make, so be careful about that one. Alina says, humanity's reliance on industrialism has led the earth onto a path of self-destruction. Good. I know from Alina's statement that I'm going to hear in supporting passages about industrialism and its polluting aspect. Awesome. All right, 5th one. Rap is both a creative and original form of music. It also has its roots in American jazz. Oh, don't worry if you didn't get to 4 or 5. Don't worry about it. Don't sweat it. Just anybody who has anything, let me know. Let us know what you got. Kendall, even though rap may have roots in American jazz, it is still considered an original form of music due to its creative sound performances. Wow. Kendall, that's awesome. I like it because he kind of looped in the origins in America, its roots in American jazz. I didn't expect that to be looped in, but you created a nice counterpoint with the originality of it. Very good. Anybody else? I didn't even anticipate what Kendall was going to do. I just kind of thought you could also just separate it. I could see 2 different pieces here. It's creative and original, Or you could have a paper on, it has its roots in American jazz. Those are both. But yeah, now that I look at it, those two are kind of like counterpoints. So they do work together if you loop them correctly. Good. Anybody else? Okay. Well, I just wanted to go over that with you all because, maybe you haven't been writing since last year in high school, or some of you are transfers. You haven't been writing for a while, so a little bit of a refresher about the most important part of a paper. The papers I'll be having you write in this class, the most important part is a thesis. Take a stand, make sure it is clear and direct and simple, and that it's sufficiently narrow, that it's not too broad for the supporting evidence, right? It must speak to the supporting evidence, or the supporting evidence must speak to and support the thesis, but it shouldn't be so broad that they don't meet up. Okay? That they don't match. Okay. All right, cool. Anybody have any questions or comments about any of that? All right. Cool. All right, let's talk a little bit. Let's dive into our material here. And if you have any issues or questions you want to take up further about this thesis writing or any aspects of your writing, I am here to help you. So please do talk to me. Okay. I also indicated that the writing studio is up and running. I believe I put the website on your paper sheet. And this is the writing studio at Micah, and they have tutors that will work with you on Zoom. So please use that service. I highly recommend it. Okay, they can be very useful. At the very least, to proofread your papers, even if they're not, fine-tooth comb for every little grammatical error. Okay. So I wanted to say a word about the Tao Te Ching, and again, how it fits into the theme of the course, and then from there talk about our book with Michael Pollan, which you read for today. You read chapter 1 from Botany of Desire. So the Tao Te Ching, I read it as it has a very important moral angle or moral purpose to the text, as we discussed. And that moral purpose is, why is the author telling us about Tao, and why is the author telling us about the power, the day of Tao? He's telling us this because he is urging us to emulate that power, to learn from that power, to follow that power of the Tao, which is translated as the way. It is directional, right? It is not indifferent. What is Tao? We discussed this last week. It is impossible to pin down. It is everything and nothing at once. It is the foundation and superstructure of everything, and yet it is not visible or tangible. It is, an alternate description is it is the force that permeates everything and drives everything, but is not necessarily everything. The reason I was interested in having it in part of this class, in case that wasn't already clear, is that I read the Tao Te Ching as a parable of distinction between the wild versus the domesticated. This is going to be a major theme in this class. The wild, I'm going to put this in the chat. And this is a major theme, of course, that comes up today in Michael Pollan. The wild versus the domestic. Sometimes it's also broadly cast as as nature versus civilization. Okay, and we especially saw that in Rousseau, right? He thinks civilization is the pits. With the Tao Te Ching, we are again urged to look to nature, to the untamed power of and in nature for clues on how to live. The power of untamed nature, of undomesticated nature, of wild nature. This power is implicit in water. right? Water is the most important metaphor in the Tao Te Ching. Be like water. How does water exert its force? Again, can some of you remind us? What is the power? Shall we describe the power of water? Naima says passive.
It has the power to destroy.
Right. It's immensely powerful. Non-violent, Mackenzie says. Well, how does that square with what Kendall said? Kendall said it has the power to destroy. Sounds pretty violent to me.
Well, it approaches like violent situations in a non-violent way, if that makes sense.
I know what you're trying to say. I'm just trying to urge you to get there. Anybody want to help her out? Non-violent violence? What the hell? Who's going to help her? Alina, powerful but not malicious. Anybody else? Well, if you are ever a homeowner or you live in your own apartment and you start to get water damage, you'll notice that water is incredibly destructive and sometimes in stealthy ways. It's slow but steady. And it can do immense damage and it is often unnoticed. Water damage is often unnoticed until you pull back the wall and you're like, oh my God. So what I take Mackenzie trying to say is, it doesn't necessarily assault you, right? It is a stealth attacker in a way, unless of course you look at those pictures of those videos of the tsunami, which that's close to attacking there. But even in those cases, they seem a little pretty like slow but steady. And what does this mean for our own behavior? Why should we be like water? What is the moral recommendation there? How should you be more like water? Alina, be flowy. Huh. All right. What does that mean?
I don't know if this is too greeting card, but I think that being like water is being able to recognize your power and knowing what to do with it, or at least how you want to approach it.
Okay. Who was that? Who was that? Alina? No. Oh, that was you, Ava. Thanks. I do want to hear I want Alina to explain herself too. Max says, adapt to your surroundings. Good. That's what water does. It flows into crevices. What else?
I feel I kind of was saying something along the lines of Max as well, of like being adaptable and like
The saying, go with the flow. That kind
yeah,
of. All right.
be flowy.
Good. Anybody else? What does it mean to emulate the power? What does it mean for you personally to emulate the power of water? Any other thoughts?
Water kind of goes without any real want or direction, which is kind of important to Taoism. It just kind of goes in its natural path. So just go kind of in your natural path, I guess.
Nice. I like that, Nina. That was great. Yeah, water doesn't really have its own internal force. It's like, what it means to go with the flow is it is carried along is impelled by gravity or by open spaces, inertia into those spaces. Good. Anybody else? I was saying at the end of our conversation last week, we were meditating on poem number 55, which in your translation is not ideal by any stretch, but essentially, another metaphor we could look to, or something that is emblematic of the power of Tao, is a baby, right? And he has that in 55. He says a baby can scream for hours and hours and not go hoarse. Why is that? Did any of you spend any time with babies this week researching, studying? Why can babies scream for hours and not go hoarse? Because of their posture. Yeah. Good. What else? I was saying last week, their posture is kind of indicative of something else.
Didn't you mention that they were flexible?
Yeah, very flexible. They bounce like a ball.
How they're not like exposed to people kind of telling them, sit up straight and stand like this or whatever. They're not like exposed to.
And they sure can't.
Yeah.
I mean, have you ever gone hoarse? Think about the times where you've gone hoarse. There's this. I am a sports fan. I know this is not typical for Micah people to admit, but I actually enjoy football. And the Ravens have this one. The Baltimore Ravens have this one coach. He can barely speak. He's like 60. He's been hoarse for probably decades, right? Think about when you've gone hoarse. The kind of pressure and exertion involved, right, in doing that to your voice. This suggests the baby doesn't have that kind of exertion at all, right? What is it about the baby that allows him to do this? Maybe you looked at the video of Pavarotti I sent around, but one thing I neglected to mention to you all, singing is again very instructive for Taoism. In this respect, singers will tell you that to be a good singer, you have to make your voice an instrument. Sorry, you make your body an instrument. Excuse me. You make your body an instrument. And for anybody here who plays instruments, you know that what is key to an instrument, in a very Taoist point, is the space in the instrument, right? A guitar is space surrounded by wood, and a piano is space, and the trombone and my daughter's ukulele that she will never stop playing, and I may have to shatter one of these days, that there's space in there, right? So when singers say you make your body an instrument, that means you have to become open. And so what I was hoping in the video, you may have noticed in Pavarotti, is how he opens himself. And in so doing, relaxing, by the way, he lets the sound resonate out of him, right? So a good singer makes space. Does a baby do this? I don't know, but a baby is highly relaxed. That's for sure. There's no tension there. That's the point, right? He also says we didn't look at the rest of number 55. If you have your text there handy, you can take a look. But he says, oh, yes, Alina, baby breathing or belly breathing. Exactly. That's right. Thank you. Number 55, babies don't get stung. This is also written in number 55. Babies do not get stung. Snakes and wasps don't bite the baby. Beasts do not maul the baby. This is the next sentence, everybody, right? It actually comes before the point that the baby can scream forever and not grow hoarse. The baby also doesn't get stung, and snakes don't bite the baby, and beasts don't maul the baby. So I wonder if anybody has thoughts on why that is. Elva looks amused. I wonder what she's thinking about. Why don't snakes bite the baby? Why don't bees bite the baby?
Are we sure they don't?
Oh, they do. They do, but statistically, it's rarer. And I stand by that. Even though I don't know a single shred of evidence, I know that's correct.
Is this supposed to be a metaphor? Because I'm thinking like, I mean, we usually don't take babies out to meet snakes, which is why the statistic might be lower.
Well, let me ask you this. How do you get stung? You have a friend wants to get stung. I got some advice for you. Your friend's kind of dumb. Your friend's like, I've never been stung before. I kind of want to know what that is. You're like, oh, dude, I got it for you. This is what you do. What do you recommend?
Oh, yeah, running straight into the beehive, yeah. Yeah, what Felix said, pissing off a bee.
Go find a beehive and poke it. Right? Last time.
Good.
Alina.
I'm good. No thanks.
Last time I got stung, I have a bunch of raspberries in the backyard, and I noticed these wasps. Can't say it right. A wasp. Wasps love my raspberries, and I was mad at them. And they were eating my raspberries, so I flicked one. He had eaten half the raspberry. I flicked it. He came back and stung me. A baby wouldn't do that, right?
Toddlers.
Huh?
Toddlers would.
Toddlers. Well, hang on, Elva. Did I mention that my raspberry bushes are 6 feet tall?
Oh.
Babies. So Lao Tzu lied to us. They do get stung. They will get bitten. They will be mauled, but it's far less likely. And it's far less likely because what? What's the general point?
They aren't threatening.
They aren't threatening.
And they don't, I guess they don't know enough about them to see them as something bad. So
Perhaps.
they're not bothered.
That's a nice point, James. Not sure it's entirely correct, but the spirit is right. If a little toddler ambles by my raspberry bushes, the wasp might look at him like, oh, he can't even reach us. Screw that. But I walk by and they're like, oh, this guy. Oh no, they're ready. Alina says, snakes aren't threatened by a small child minding their business. There you go. I think the lesson is mind your business. Why aren't children stung or bitten or mauled? They're less likely to provoke. I think that's the point. And there's an overarching message for us here from the Tao Te Ching, which is don't provoke. This is a message for our relationship to nature, right? And, nature gives us problems when we provoke it, okay? I think there is a general point here about the pandemic, actually, that I think Lao Tzu would be very interested in. Do you guys know what scientists think, where they think that the pandemic actually started? And I don't mean geographically necessarily, but do you know how they think it started?
Didn't they say like from some type of like animal, like a bird or something?
You're close.
Is
Bat.
it a bat?
Bat.
It was bat.
I think it was from a bat.
And somebody ate it.
Well, no, it's not even clear that somebody ate it, but the bat, it was a bat. There are a lot of caves near Wuhan, and somehow, there was a cross-species transferal. And there's an interesting article, if I'll find it for you, on The Economist last month, pointing out that, if you look at the last 10 or so, 10, 15 years, the pandemics that we've had, SARS and Zika virus, and what's the one there in West Africa? I can't remember. But, these viruses, what's happening is these pandemics are happening. Sky puppies, what is going on here? Okay, I'll deal with that in just a second. Ebola. Thank you, Duncan. Sky puppies, Ebola. Welcome to reality, everybody. Here we go. Bring it back down. Okay. So anyway, as I was saying, the pandemic, we are going to be having one of the reasons we have these pandemics in the last 15 years, that, one of the reasons that they're becoming more prevalent is because humans are pressing further and further into the wild, and they're interacting more with wild creatures. And as this happens, these diseases, they evolve and they jump species. And this was the case with SARS, and this was the case with Zika and Ebola. Okay. And so the article was saying that, as preserving wilderness is actually a very important way to prevent pandemics. But since humans are largely, foraging into wilderness areas, we better get used to these pandemics. So again, the point is, I think what Lao Tzu is saying to us is, nature is problematic. These creatures are problematic when you provoke them. Now, really, the Taoist in me should have seen that wasp eating the raspberry, and I should have said, you know what? Have the goddamn raspberry. I have all these others, but I was greedy. I was going to make some mint raspberry jam. It was delicious. And I got into a fight with a wasp, and I lost. Well, for about 3 seconds. I won in the end because I got the raspberry. But really, do I have to fight with this guy? Not really. Don't provoke. Now, about jam. Well, I only have 2 jars, Lena. I'm sorry. My wife already got one. So, if we're all present in class, I would spread it on some brie and give it to everybody. Good. So, the message is that the power, I hear Lao Tzu saying something to the effect of, the power of nature is immense. And like water, it gives. But you better beware. And don't be fooled. The power of nature is latent. And I've typed that in the chat there for you. I want us to dwell on that word latent. Latent means it's like slow in coming, right? You don't notice it immediately, but it will fuck you up. And I was starting to think about this in relation to water. And this is the way I thought about it. I saw a documentary a few years ago about Louisiana. And, we had one of the most devastating hurricanes in modern history was in New Orleans, in Hurricane Katrina in 2005, when the hurricane caused the lake and the Mississippi River to breach the levees into the city. And what's interesting is that they were explaining how the state of Louisiana for all these years had been eating away at the swamps, right? Basically, Louisiana is a gigantic swamp of silt that drains out of Middle America and then just protrudes out into the Gulf of Mexico. And what engineers never really thought about or realized is that extension, that land mass, even though it looks like it's useless land to many people, it protects the city of New Orleans, or it protects inland from the storm surge. And over the years, the engineers went ahead and they drained that land because they thought it was useless. They drained it. They put pipes through it. And you can now see maps of Louisiana, and basically the whole boot of Louisiana is completely diminished. And it's like the webs of a web of a leaf that's, where all the leaf has been eaten away or degraded. And the point is, like, it was very easy to ignore the power of water in those cases. But then when the hurricane hit, it nearly destroyed the city. The power of nature is latent. It seems like it gives, but it will explode in unexpected ways, that we're not prepared for. And, you can think of I hadn't really thought about it in other ways, but I'm sure you could apply this metaphor to many different types of disasters. Right now in the West, we're dealing with these terrible forest fires, So, yeah, good. That's all I wanted to say about that. Is there any questions or comments about any of that business? Yes. People fucking with nature. I mean, we'll see this point over and over again, and this is a major theme with Michael Pollan, is that nature seems to give. Nature seems to submit to what we want. It seems to submit to our plans. But what happens in the process? The way that Michael Pollan will put it is, is domestication an illusion, right? When we domesticate nature, is that an illusion in itself? Good. All right, so let's talk about Michael Pollan, The Botany of Desire. I like this text. By the way, just to give you all a plan of what we're going to do here, we'll start off into this discussion today on Botany of Desire, and I imagine we'll deal with the lion's share of it next week. There are a lot of really interesting topics in here for us to pull apart. So we'll start this today, and then next week we'll meet again at the appointed hour. You will not have any reading assignment, and you will not have any reading responses due. Your drafts will be due that day, but we will still meet for a class discussion, okay? And I'll remind you of that later, okay? So let's dive into the Michael Pollan book. How did y'all find this one? Anybody have any general observations they'd like to share?
I think this one was my favorite one so far.
Yeah, he's a goodie. Anybody else? Any objections?
It was a lot.
It was a lot? Little big?
A lot about apples.
A lot about apples. I was like, it was a lot about apples. I get ya. Don't worry. I will never make you read about apples ever again. You're done. Anybody else?
I feel like personally I liked the Tao Te Ching a little bit better. It just kind of like resonated with me a little bit more.
Good. Right. Elva points out your next reading is about pears. And the day after that is kumquats, and then crab apples. Well, I highly recommend this book, okay? I'm a fan, personally. And I'm just going to tell you what it's about. Here it is. This is the cover. I'm just going to tell you about it briefly because it is a pretty unique book. I've taught it a couple times now. I do like it a lot. By the way, Michael Pollan is absolutely, I think he's a great author. He's written some books. I've taught a couple of his before. He's a biologist out at Berkeley. He's pretty much a public intellectual, though. He's often on NPR. His most famous book is a book called The Omnivore's Dilemma. I will be referencing it mostly next week. It has to do, it was written about 10 years ago. That book is about our eating habits and our relationship to nature. Michael Pollan is at the forefront of a really interesting kind of new field that, for lack of a better word, I mean, I guess it would be called food ethics. And the reason I find him interesting is because he's not only talking about the ethics of food with regard to the environment. It's also about our choices of what we eat and what that says about us as humans and persons and moral agents. And I think that's really interesting. Most recently, not most recently, well, he has a new book out last year about coffee and about our relationship to caffeine, which is pretty interesting. But his most popular recent book is a book about the psychoactive properties of magic mushrooms. He wrote, and mescaline and those kinds of, that's on my to-do list to read. I haven't gotten there yet, but I've heard him talk about it on NPR and it's super interesting. So the running theme is, for him, his interest is, he's a biologist, he's a botanist by practice. His specialty is the science of plants. And he wants to talk about, the way plants and humans interact. Now, what's interesting about this book, which was written in 2000, is he has 4 chapters in here. And 4 chapters, each chapter is a different plant and its relationship to humans. Chapter 1 is about the apple and its relationship to American culture and the frontier. Chapter 2 is about the tulip, the flower, the tulip. And it has largely to do with, there was a stock market for tulip bulbs in Netherlands in the 1600s, and the whole culture got crazy and wrapped up in it. That one is the least interesting chapter in my view. But then there's a chapter 3 about marijuana, which is, I think Micah's students should be interested in that. But what that was interesting about that chapter is it's about how the domestication of marijuana has so drastically changed that plant and is still doing so. And then the last chapter is about, yes, it is a lot like Malcolm Gladwell. He actually is like that. I think he's a similar kind of writer. He's a good writer. And then and I wonder if that makes me think if he has any podcasts. I wonder, because Malcolm Gladwell has an amazing podcast. If you haven't heard it, I highly recommend it. The last chapter in this book, Botany of Desire, is also my other favorite one. It's about the potato. Now that may not sound exciting, but let me tell you, it is fascinating. My mother is from Ireland, so I thought this was really important. The potato, it's like a human history of the potato. Best vegetable, I agree. The population, the Irish are synonymous with potatoes, right? There's only one thing that's kind of funny about that. Potatoes are not from Ireland. They were a new introduction. They are from, anybody know where potatoes come from originally? Peruvian.
I think it's from North American, from the Indian.
Well, you actually,
Sorry.
Elva has it right. It's from South America. It's from the Andes.
Yeah.
So in a very short period of time, this plant migrates from South America to Ireland, of all places, and the whole population becomes dependent on it. And due to various geographical and political features, the Irish become utterly dependent on potatoes, so much so that the population of Ireland explodes. And in the early 1800s, the population was somewhere between 10 and 15 million people. Today, it is 3 million people. And so it's a story about how the potato, the influx of the potato, or relation to the potato, set up for the Irish potato famine and the genocide that entailed. So our relationships to plants are hardly innocent, and they may be easy to ignore, but they have grave consequences for how you know, they have a serious impact on human history and geopolitics, you know, that we may not notice or admit. In the case of the apple, they indicate surprising things about our history. They indicate surprising things we choose to ignore, right? Now, for the Americans in the house, you know, you may know there's an old saying, right? As American as apple pie, right? You might have heard that before. It says American as apple pie. Well, that's a fucking lie, right? Next time your grandma says that, you turn, that's a fucking lie, and then you throw this book in her face, right? We're going to make you fighters at Micah. You'll become, or assholes, one or the other. Why is that a lie?
Because apples aren't native in America.
Where are they from?
Most of the apples that we know today are originally from Europe and that they were brought here.
Kazakhstan.
Kazakhstan, which is next to Russia, former part of the former Soviet Union. Apples are a commie fruit, right? And then we say they are as American as apple pie. Good. And, you know, the reason I like this chapter on the apple is because it is interwoven with certain myths about the American frontier. And if you grew up in America, there are a couple mythical figures you may have learned about as you grew up. And one of them, in this case, that would be Johnny Appleseed. I have to admit, I never really thought of him as a very important or consequential person till I read this book. Who was this guy? Or let me put it this way. Why don't we start with the legend? What is the legend of Johnny Appleseed? What did he do according to legend and myth?
He was like this really eccentric dude who introduced, like, he made like the apple business bloom and grow, and like also introduced like cider. And he's often described as like this otherworldly being, like this guy who had one foot in nature and the other in civilization.
Good. What is the legendary view of him, though? Strictly legend. You were already dipping into the more nuanced aspect. What's the legendary story of him?
He was
Yes, yes.
I'm sorry,
like a lot of us, right? Like
but he was a philanthropist.
He was
a
like
charitable person that was really godly.
I understand, Chanel.
Gotcha. Charitable person. Who is he doing charity for? What was his charity? Why is he an American myth at all? Should we start by talking about other American myths? We could do that. Because the point is that these different American myths, they portray something about how the country or the leadership, the ruling class, wished to be transmitted about that country, right?
Johnny Appleseed, he basically traveled on his own and planted like a ton of apple trees, which gave off the message that it was that Americans typically were like persevering, hardworking, and most importantly, like very independent, which was what they were pushing for when they were like pushing the frontier. It's like everyone can succeed. Look at this one man who made such a huge impact.
And who is he helping? According to the myth?
Good old Americans?
Well, which ones? What were they up to? The ones he was helping?
I actually don't know much about the Johnny Appleseed. I remember learning it in like
Okay.
elementary school.
It's indicated in the text who he was helping. I mean, Pollan kind of muddies it, but
In reality, or like myth, in like mythos,
I'm not really
he
sure.
would have
Go ahead.
providing apple families, I believe, right? Who needed them to like
Where was he doing this? Let me start there. Where was he doing this at this time?
On the frontier?
This was the frontier. This is Ohio, early 1800, which was the frontier. So the reason that Johnny Appleseed is interesting just is because he is a frontier myth. Okay? Hang on, Alina. You're straying from the myth. Okay? Let's stick to the myth. Who's he helping on the frontier?
Frontiersman.
Sure. What was he literally doing? Yeah, settlers. Yep. What was he literally doing? He was, what was he doing? Michael Pollan writes at one point that he died a rich man. What was he up to?
It was about helping people settle in land, right? Because the land was, there was laws that you had to have an orchard to settle down. So he was helping people expand.
He was establishing nurseries for small trees. And then the pioneers, the settlers, as they were moving west, they would come through and they would pick up things for their future homestead. And among the things they would pick up would be these apples. Okay. Now, according to myth, why did the settlers need these apples? According to myth, what is ignored according to Pollan? What do people ignore about this myth?
They ignore how important apple cider, like hard cider, was to the American people.
Exactly.
Good, yeah. He explains that after Prohibition, it's funny, I just saw an interesting documentary about the temperance movement in America in the late 1800s. That was a big thing. They were trying to ban alcohol for like 50 years, and then they finally pulled it off in the 20s. And as they were doing that, all these apple salesmen were like, oh my God, we got to rebrand the apple. And how do they rebrand the apple? Another classic saying. Hello? Anybody?
An apple a day keeps the doctor away.
Apple away keeps the doctor away. Another fucking lie, right? But this is what they came up with, right? They turned apples into an eating fruit, and it had not been. Right. The apples were actually for booze. How does he know? Michael Pollan, that is.
Original apples were like bitter and like gross, right?
Mm-hmm. Good. I need to hear more. There's a key word here. There's a key fact about the apple plant or the apple seed.
Oh, each like apple seed would make like a different type of apple. Like it wouldn't do like the same thing, right?
Excellent. I know what the technical word for that is. It's in the text.
Offspring?
Heterozygous. Alina nailed it. Zygote, I think that's seed, hetero, as opposed to homo. You're going to get a different plant every time. Maybe you were a kid. My kids did this all the time. Like, I'm a gardener, and they'd come out with like some orange seeds, like, Daddy, can you plant these? And I'd like, nope, screw you. Oranges don't grow here. Try again. They, maybe you thought the same thing with an apple seed, like, I'm going to grow an apple. And then you would have been sorely disappointed, and you turn into a raging alcoholic, drinking your alcoholic cider that you produce because you put an apple seed in the ground. You're going to get a different fruit every single time. That's the crazy fact about the apple. what's interesting is that the apple seems like, so he argues that there is like this, this is page 11, there's an ineluctable wildness in the apple. An ineluctable wildness, meaning ineluctable, meaning like permanent, inevitable, unavoidable, right? It's there, which is so funny because the apple is seemingly, you know, do apples seem wild to you? You know, no, they're like the most common and obvious and pervasive fruit. You go to McDonald's, they'll give you a little bag of apples. You know, you go to the store, grocery store, they're there. When at the grocery store I go to, you have a little platform for the tropical fruits, right? You got your dragon fruit and your papaya, and but the apples, they're over there on their own mound, right? They all look the same. This is not the wild fruit. What's so funny is that at the heart of it, he says there is a kind of wildness that makes it completely unpredictable. So he says, you know, this, what we know about him is that he was planting seeds. And if you plant the seed of an apple, you will get any number of fruit. It's unpredictable. And the only thing you can do with that fruit, for the most part, not the only thing, but mostly what you can do is drink it. Make cider and drink it. Why were the pioneers such booze hounds, everybody? This probably explains a lot. Why was it so important that they have booze?
It was cleaner and more accessible than water at the time, right?
That is true. It is also the meaning of life. I'm just kidding. It's what you said. That's why in medieval Europe, they drank beer all the time. They didn't have coffee. Coffee came and bailed us out. Even children were drinking cider. And that's something that nobody admits at all. Completely, yeah, like skimmed over, like, oh, Johnny was, you know, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. So wholesome, so Christian. Yeah. Yes, Coke in Coke, exactly. The good old days, the 80s. Good. Let's talk a little bit about the frontier from a couple of perspectives. How did the European immigrants view this frontier, the interior, this country that they were conquering, for lack of a better word? How did they view it? Anybody?
Like savage, like in need of to be like tamed, I guess. I don't know.
Good. In need of being tamed. Good. What else? How did the religion of the European settlers impact how they viewed this continent, the interior? Anybody have any comments on that? Manifest destiny.
Like a sense of entitlement to change the land.
Good. But why was the land in need of being changed?
It like didn't fit their needs as far as the plants they wanted to like live off of.
Okay. That's a little general, Ava. Can I get more details from anybody? Anybody at all? You or anyone? You're invited to specify more, Ava, though, if you want to. But I didn't want to pressure you.
I do know there was a passage briefly where he said, like, Johnny Appleseed represented, how everyone was bringing in, like, medicinal plants and just plants that they were used to in Europe to America because, they felt that they had a need for them and that they could bring them.
Good. Elva points out, got to bring monotheism to the savages. Indeed. Yeah, the continent was untamed. And what were the natives doing with this continent in the view of the Europeans?
Nothing.
Nothing. Exactly. They weren't doing enough with it. And it's on us Europeans to tap these resources here, to make settlements. Were the natives doing nothing with this continent?
No.
No. They were plenty busy. But the Europeans ignored this. Why did they ignore it? Why'd they ignore the activities of the natives here in this continent? They have their own preconceived notions of what a civilization is. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? They wanted more stuff. Well, and James says ignorance, but the question is ignorance of what? What were they ignoring? Does anybody know anything about Native American farming? Did you ever learn anything about Native American farming practices in elementary school? There's a key lesson that my kids all learned when they were in like 3rd grade. No? The Three Sisters? You guys never heard of the Three Sisters? What are the Three Sisters? Elvis, what the hell is that?
One of them was squash, corn, and
It's going to climb up the corn stalk.
the thing Elva said, maize.
Maize is corn. Beans. And it was kind of ingenious. I'm a gardener, so I can appreciate what they were up to. Anybody know how it fit? I'll give you all a chance first. What was so ingenious about this farming system? No? Anybody have any gardening instincts here? Well, obviously, the corn stalk is a support for the beans, right? Climbs up. The squash plants are low, and they have big, broad leaves. And so they grow down along the roots, and they preserve the roots. I know we'll tie up soon. The squash plant grows around the roots and shades the roots and preserves the water. So it's like a mulch. So it's really, and by the way, beans have nitrogen. they artificially fixed nitrogen in the soil, which means that beans are the one plant that they actually fertilize the soil. It was fucking brilliant. It was great. When you drive through farmland today, what do you see? Do you see three sisters? No. You see what is called monoculture. We're going to talk this way. We're going to talk about this later. They were practicing what is called polyculture. They were growing many things at the same time. And Michael Pollan is a proponent of polyculture, as are a lot of people. Then the Europeans didn't recognize, they thought the natives were not using the land because they did not recognize what their form of cultivation looked like. They only knew how to farm in their way. And if they didn't see it, they're like, well, guess they're doing nothing. Now, today, we know that there is also a more ominous aspect to their ignorance. And the ominous aspect is this. The ominous aspect is not only that they literally ignored their humanity. That's ominous enough, but it's even worse, right? The early Europeans, they tend to think of this world, of the New World. The early, the Europeans tend to think of America as, nonstop, pristine forest from coast to coast, right? And it's very very sparsely populated, right? And that is a notion of the wild that was propagated for a very long time. And now a lot of archaeologists and historians are pointing out that the reason that that notion endured for so long is because of the literal genocide of the Native Americans. There was a report last year written about, I think it was in the New York Times, I saw it. It pointed at, historians, actually these are climatologists who are looking through history. And they noticed that in the period of time immediately after European contact with Native Americans, we had a little mini ice age on Earth. And this was because there was a dramatic stopping of, burning and cultivation. And essentially they're tying this ice age to the genocide of the Native Americans. Now, we don't know how many were killed. They think that somewhere between 50 to 60% of Native American population were exterminated in the years after European contact. The way this worked, of course, is through disease, right? So if the Puritans arrive in 1600, disease becomes endemic and wipes out native populations along the East Coast. So that means that 100 years later, when the Europeans start treading inward, they look and they say, oh my God, there's nobody here. And nothing's happening to the land. And the reason nothing here, nothing happened to land is because the people had been killed. They had been exterminated. And in many cases, it was witting. They knew that the natives were especially susceptible to smallpox. That was the major disease, and they would give them blankets that were already infected with smallpox. The point about the Ice Age is that the natives had been, the Native Americans, they had been plenty busy chopping down trees and cultivating the land. But then that stopped dramatically and quickly in somewhere around 1600. And so for about when the Europeans really started to push into the continent 100 years later, it looked like no one was there and no activity had been happening. So, there's 2 points about this frontier that I wanted us to make, which is that, wanted you to understand, is that from the European standpoint, nature, this was a hostile and forbidding place. There are wild creatures out there. This is a continent that has a lot of inherent dangers in it. This is not, of course, the way the natives viewed it. This was their home. But it was easy also to ignore the presence of the natives in this continent, and for a variety of reasons. And one thing I want to talk about next week, and so I'll end on this point as kind of like it, pointing us towards our discussion next week, is the way that that Americans, I should say, have grown up, viewing this frontier. I should say the frontier, I'll put it this way. The frontier experience of this country, even though it was 100 years ago, 150 years ago, really impacted this culture in many ways going forward. You could say it played a significant role defining what this country is, the way many people see this, the way many Americans see this country. Many Americans don't. We're in the middle of a very heated political moment, but I will call these frontier values. These frontier values, they endure. And next week, I want to talk about these frontier values. I have a feeling you know what they are. And I also want to talk about the apple, even though Naima's bored with it. There's some really important things we got to get to the bottom of here. Like, why the hell are there 6 fucking apples now? And there used to be hundreds. Hundreds and hundreds of apples. And I only get Red Delicious, Granny Smith, Gala, Fuji, Jonathan. I'm done. I'm out. That's it. Can't think of any more. But this country 100 years ago was Jonathan. Yes, it's yummy. Macintosh. Thanks. 100 years ago, this country was rich in apples. Okay. Everybody can shut up now. I don't want to hear about it anymore because you're undermining my point. Honeycrisp is good. But there were like hundreds of them. Who read all the names? Well, yeah. What's interesting is how he described them, right? There were apples. He visits this orchard up in New York State, which has all the historic apples. And there were apples that tasted like banana. Apples as big as your head, as tiny as your pocket. All kinds of shapes and flavors. And the apple is so malleable. You can grow it for so many different purposes. Field trip. Yeah, no, you're doing that on your own. Sorry. My dad growing up, he grew up during the Second World War, and they would grow apples and put them in their attic, and the apples would keep all winter, There are apples for apple pie, and there's apples for applesauce, and, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There were so many different purposes and tastes, and it's all gone now, So we got to get to the bottom of that. And as we get to the bottom of that, we're really going to be delving into this topic of monoculture versus polyculture and, how that's impacted us and what that says about modern culture. Because this is not only about American culture. This is about modern culture. Make cider a class project. Well, if you do it, you must share it with me. That's all I have to say about that. Cider is good. All right, everybody. I'm done. I'm going to stick around, like I said, in case anybody wants to chat. Otherwise, I will see you next week, and we will get deeper into the apple and frontier values and yada, yada, okay? So you will be writing your papers this week. If you have any issues when you write them, I urge you to get in touch with me, okay? Contact me. Email me. We can set up a meeting. And they are due by the end of the day Thursday, sorry. But we will also have class at the regularly appointed time, and we'll carry on our discussion then, okay? All right, have a great day, everybody, and I'll stick around if anybody wants to chat. Bye. Hello.
Hi. So I have I don't know if this is a good idea. Like, I went over it with Laura Birdsall and stuff, but like,